Welcome to Alter Health, the epigenetic code. This is where we talk about the science of how your life shapes your genes and how your body can change when you change the conditions around it. Real stories, real science, and real answers. Let's go. In this season, I want to bring epigenetics to life. My goal is to explain what epigenetics actually is without turning it into a dry science lesson. Instead of overwhelming you with complicated terminology, I want to use real-life examples, metaphors, and fascinating facts to show why this field has captured my attention so deeply. What fascinates me most about epigenetics is that it changes the way we think about health. It reveals that our bodies are not simply prisoners of our genes. Rather, our genes are constantly interacting with the world around us, responding to the food we eat, the stress we experience, the relationships we have, the environment we live in, and even the thoughts we think. My hope is that as we explore these ideas together, some of that fascination will rub off on you too. Because epigenetics is not just something for scientists, researchers, or health professionals. It is something that touches every single one of us. Understanding it can give us a completely different perspective on our health, our choices, and our potential to influence how we feel and function. And that is exactly what I hope this season will do. Help you see your body, your health, and your possibilities through a new lens. I want to start this season by telling you about two women I have been thinking about for years. I will not give you their names. They are not my clients. They are two people I know peripherally through other people, and their story has stayed with me since the first time I heard it. It's one of those stories that, once you really see it, you cannot stop seeing it. You start noticing the same shape in other families. You start noticing it in your own family. And eventually, the story stops being about two women and starts being about something much bigger. So they are sisters. Twins, actually. Not the kind of twins who look slightly different from each other. The kind of twins who share the same genetic blueprint. Identical. Same parents, same upbringing, same town, school, the whole thing. They grew up in the same house in a small town in the north of Germany, in a family that was warm and ordinary, ate the same meals at the same table, slept in the same bedroom for the first 18 years of their lives. Their mother used to dress them the same on Sundays. Their father used to mix them up on the phone. They were, in every measurable sense, the same starting material. Then they left home, the way young people do, and the two lives split. One of them moved to Frankfurt. She took a job in finance, in one of those big glass buildings where the lights stay on long after the city has gone to sleep. She married late, in her 30s, to a man she met through work. They decided not to have children. She traveled constantly. She smoked socially, which means she smoked when she was stressed, which means she smoked a lot. She drank her wine in the evenings to come down from the day. She slept bad for years, sometimes 4 hours, sometimes 5. She didn't exercise much because she was tired. And this was her life for almost 3 decades. The other one did something different. She moved after university to a small village in the south of France. She married a man whose family had been growing things in that valley for generations. She had 3 children, one after the other. She walked every day, often with a child on her hip and another one trailing behind. She ate from her own garden when the season allowed, and from the small market in the village when it didn't. She kept regular hours. She slept like a stone because her body was tired in the way that bodies are tired after they have been used properly. She drank her wine slowly with her husband at the table and rarely more than a glass. She almost never smoked. She had hard years like everyone has hard years. She lost her father young. One of her children was sick for a long time. But the structure of her life, the rhythm of it, stayed roughly the same for almost 3 decades. They are now both in their late 50s. One of them has been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that her doctors didn't see coming. She has chronic fatigue that doesn't lift. She has been on 3 different medications for the last 5 years, and the medications have side effects, and the side effects have side effects, and her body and her face look at least 10 years older than she actually is. She has lost most of her energy for the work she used to love. She has retired earlier than she planned, and she is, what she tells the few people who ask honestly, deeply tired in a way that no amount of rest seems to fix. The other one is, by every reasonable measure, well. She's energetic in a quiet, steady way. She's sharp. She runs after her grandchildren, who are at the age where they run fast and unpredictably. She has the bone density of a much younger woman, which her doctor commented on at her last checkup. Her blood work is unremarkable. She doesn't look young in a vain way. She looks her age, but she looks like her age is fitting her instead of grinding her down. 2 bodies, the same genes, 2 completely different outcomes. And I think you can guess who's who. Now you might say, well, of course, one of them lived a hard life, the other one lived a soft life. That is obvious. And yes, on the surface, that's obvious. But I want you to actually sit with what that means. Because if their genes are identical, which they truly are, then the difference between their bodies at the age of 58 is not coming from their DNA. It cannot be. The DNA is the same. So where is it coming from? Where does the difference live? If the blueprint is identical, what is doing the actual building? That question, the question of where the difference lives, is what this entire season is about. The answer is one of the most important scientific findings on the last 20 years. It is also a finding that most doctors will not tell you about, not because they are hiding it from you, but because they were not taught it, and the standard medical appointment is not built to integrate it. So the knowledge sits in the research journals, where it has been sitting for years, while you are out here trying to figure out why your body is doing what it is doing. I want to bring that knowledge to you, properly. Over the next 11 weeks, I'm going to walk you through it. Not in a textbook way, in a way that you can actually use in your own kitchen, bedroom, in your own life. By the time we're done, you will have a way of looking at your body that nobody at any of your medical appointments has ever offered you. And you will be able to use it for the rest of your life. This is Alter Health, the medicine nobody told you about. And I'm Dr. Nicola Schmitz. And today we are beginning Season 2. The word epigenetics. It sounds like one of those words that was invented to keep ordinary people out of a conversation, but it is not. It's actually a very simple word once you take it apart. The Greek prefix epi means above, or on top of, or alongside. And genetics, you already know. So epigenetics literally means the layer above genetics. The layer that sits on top of your genes and decides what they do. And that is the thing I want you to hold on to. Because if you remember nothing else from this episode, this is the sentence that matters. Your genes are not in charge of your body. There is a layer above your genes that is in charge. The genes are the script. The layer above the genes is the director. And the director is being influenced every minute, every second of every day by you. Now, for most of the 20th century, we didn't know this. The scientific story we were told, the story most doctors over the age of 50 were taught in medical school, was that genes determine almost everything. You got your hand of cards at conception, and that hand of cards played out over the course of your life. If you had cancer in your family, you were at risk for cancer. If you had heart disease in your family, you were at risk for heart disease. Or if your mother got osteoporosis at 60, you probably would too. The body was, in this view, a kind of slow-motion fulfillment of a genetic prophecy. This was not a small idea. It shaped how doctors thought, how patients were counseled, how research money was spent, and how families lived. People went through their lives waiting for the disease that ran in their family to show up. People made decisions about whether to have children based on what was written in their DNA. People were told there was nothing they could do because the genes had already decided. For 100 years, this story felt like science because the science we had at the time was not yet able to see past it. I want to tell you another story that almost nobody outside of genetics research has heard, and that changes how you understand everything I'm about to teach you in this season. It is one of the most important stories in modern medicine, and it ended in a kind of public silence because the result was so different from what everyone had expected. In the late 1980s, the international scientific community decided to do something that had never been done before. They decided to map the entire human genome, to sequence every letter of human DNA from beginning to end, and to identify every single gene we carried. The project was called the Human Genome Project. It was one of the largest scientific undertakings in history. It cost billions of dollars. It involved laboratories across multiple continents. It took 13 years, and the expectation going in was that we were about to find the answer to almost everything. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, mental illness, autoimmune conditions, aging itself. All of it was assumed to be written in the genes, and once we knew the full sequence, we would be able to read the genetic script and understand finally why human bodies do what they do. There was real excitement. There were predictions that within a decade of finishing the project, we would have personalized medicine, that we would be able to look at the person's genes and predict their entire health trajectory and prevent it where needed. In 2003, the project finished. The full human genome had been sequenced, and the result was, scientifically speaking, deeply confusing. Researchers had assumed that humans, being complex and intelligent, would have somewhere around 100,000 genes, possibly more. The number kept getting revised in the press releases as the project went on. Most experts thought a number in the low 100,000s was reasonable. The actual number, when it was finally counted, was around 20,000. 20,000 genes for an entire human being. Put that in perspective. A roundworm, a creature that is about 1 millimeter long and has 302 cells in its entire body has around 20,000 genes too. A fruit fly has about 14,000. A simple plant called Arabidopsis has around 27,000, meaning it has more genes than a human being does. This was, to put it bluntly, a disaster for the prevailing scientific view of biology. If genes were the answer, and a fruit fly had 2/3 as many genes as a human, then the genes alone couldn't be extending the complexity of who we are. The math didn't work. There had to be something else doing most of the work. And then there was the second problem, which was even stranger. When researchers looked at the human genome, they found that the actual gene coding sequences, the parts that produce proteins, made up only about 2% of the total DNA. The other 98% did not code for proteins. It didn't appear to do the kind of work that genes were supposed to do. The early geneticists, working in a framework that assumed genes were everything, called this part junk DNA. The name stuck for years. It was treated as evolutionary leftover, the genetic equivalent of vestigial organs, useless, ignored. Researchers focused on the 2% that coded for proteins because that was where the genes were, and that was what they had been trained to look at. The other 98% was put aside, almost dismissed. It took another decade before we began to understand what was actually going on in that 98%. What was going on, it turned out, was the entire regulatory system of the human body. The supposedly junk DNA was not junk at all. It was the operating instructions. It contained the switches that decide which of the 20,000 genes get used, when they get used, in what cells, in what quantities, under what conditions. It contained the chemical landscape that responds to your food, your sleep, your stress environment, and translates all of that into decisions about which genes get activated and which stay silent. This regulatory system, which we had ignored as junk for years, is what we now call the epigenome, and its complexity dwarfs the complexity of the genes themselves. The reason a human being can do what a human being does, despite having no more genes than a roundworm, is that humans have an extraordinarily sophisticated epigenetic regulation system. The orchestra is the same size in many species. The conductor is what makes the music different. This is, I think, one of the most important scientific stories of the last 50 years, and almost nobody outside of academic biology has been told about it properly. We thought genes were the answer. We mapped them all. We discovered, to our embarrassment, that there were not very many of them, and that the real story was in the part we had thrown away. That is the part we are going to spend this whole season learning about. The part that was, until recently, considered worthless. The part that turns out to be, in many ways, the most important biological information in your body. Let me give you a picture, because pictures are how most of us actually remember things. Forget the science vocabulary for a moment. Picture a piano. A piano has, depending on the model, around 88 keys. Each key on its own is a possibility. The key can be pressed or not pressed. If it's pressed, it makes a sound. If it's not pressed, it sits there in silence, ready to be played but not playing. Now, your DNA is the piano. Every cell in your body contains a complete piano. The keys are your genes. As we just discussed, the number of human genes is around 20,000. So imagine a very large piano with 20,000 keys sitting inside every cell of your body. The same piano, by the way, in every cell. The piano in a liver cell is identical to the piano in a heart cell, which is identical to the piano in a neuron in your brain. Same instrument, different music. And here's the thing nobody told you. The piano does not play itself. It's just sitting there. The keys are not pressing themselves. Something has to press the keys to produce the music. And the music is what we actually experience. The music is the proteins that get made, the hormones that get released, enzymes that go to work, immune cells that decide to mobilize, energy that gets produced in your cells. All of that is the music. The genes are only the possibility of the music. So what presses the keys? What is the piano player? It's your epigenome. The very regulatory system we just discussed, the one that lived in the part of the DNA we used to call junk. The epigenome is the system of chemical signals sitting on top of your DNA that decides moment by moment which genes are going to be active and which genes are going to be silent. Some keys get pressed often. Some keys never get pressed in your entire life, even though they are there. Some keys get pressed gently, and some get pressed so hard and so often that they wear a groove into the music. And here's the part that changes everything. The piano player is not fixed. The piano player learns. He listens to your life, to what you eat, how you sleep, how stressed you are, to what is in the air you breathe, to what is in your relationships, to whether you feel safe or not. All of that information goes into the piano player, and the piano player adjusts what it plays. Two pianos can be identical, the same keys, the same tuning, same wood, strings, but put them with two different players and you will get two completely different concerts. The one player plays a piece full of struggle and noise, the other plays a piece full of clarity and rhythm. That's the difference between the two sisters at the beginning of this episode. The pianos are identical, the players are not. One player has been receiving 25 years of crisis signals, late nights, deadlines, glass walls, cigarette smoke, alcohol, broken sleep, isolation in a city that doesn't actually know her. So the player is now playing a piece full of information, full of fatigue, immune confusion. And the other player has been receiving 25 years of different signals. Walking outside in real weather, sleeping deeply, cooking food that grew in soil she can see from her kitchen window, being around people who recognize her. So that player is playing a piece full of regulation, energy, and repair. Same piano, different player, different music, different body. That is epigenetics. That is the whole concept. Everything else we will talk about in this season is detail on top of that one idea. And here's the part of the piano image that I want you to really own, because it is where the hope lives. The player can change. The player you have today is not the player you have to have for the rest of your life. The patterns that have been set down in your cells, even patterns that have been there for years, even patterns that came from your parents and your grandparents are not permanent. They can be rewritten. Some quickly, some slowly, but they can change. The body doesn't hold a grudge. It responds to what you give it now. The damage that is reversible is reversible. The damage that is not reversible is usually smaller than you fear. And the rest of the music your body is going to play in the years you have left is genuinely in conversation with the choices you make from this point forward. Now, I have to be honest with you because the word epigenetics has, in the last few years, been picked up by a lot of people who use it badly. And I do not want to confuse what I'm going to teach you in this season with a bad version of this conversation. So let me draw some lines. Epigenetics is not the idea that you can think your way out of a disease. There is a version of this conversation, mostly in the wellness world, that says if you just believe hard enough, if you just align your energy and visualize wellness, your genes will respond. I don't work that way. I'm a scientist and I deal with the body. The body responds to inputs that are biological. Thought matters because thought affects the nervous system, and the nervous system is a real biological input. But thought on its own, without changing what you eat and how you sleep and what you're exposed to, is not going to change your genes. I have seen too many people pour their hope into mindset work while their actual body remained underfed, undermoved, undermined by toxins, and then blame themselves when the mindset work didn't produce the change they were promised. That's not epigenetics. Epigenetics is also not the idea that genetics does not matter. Some people, when they first discover this field, swing too far. They start saying things like, my genes are nothing, my lifestyle is everything. That's also not right. Your genes matter. They are real. They give you your starting point, your particular vulnerabilities, your particular strengths. If you carry a gene that predisposes you to a certain condition, that condition is statistically more likely in your life than in the life of someone without that gene. What epigenetics does is change the meaning of the word more likely. It doesn't eliminate the gene. It changes how loud the gene gets. Epigenetics is not the idea that there is one diet, one supplement, or practice that will turn all your genes in the right direction. There is no such diet or supplement. The body is a system with many inputs, and the inputs interact with each other in ways that are individual to your specific situation. What works profoundly for one person may be irrelevant for another. This is why I do not believe in protocols that get applied to everyone the same way. I believe in understanding the principles and then applying them carefully to the body in front of me. Anybody who tells you they have the one answer is selling you something, and what they are selling is usually not science. Epigenetics is not the same as genetic engineering. We are not editing your DNA. We're not changing your genetic code. The DNA you were born with is the DNA you will die with. What we are changing is the chemical environment around the DNA, which decides what the DNA does. Some people get nervous when they hear the word genetics in any context. They worry that we are tinkering with their fundamental biology, and we're not. We are working with the conversation between your biology and your daily life. That conversation was always happening. We're just choosing to take part in it consciously instead of letting it run on autopilot. And epigenetics is not magic. The improvements that come from working with your epigenome are real. They are measurable and they can be dramatic, but they take time. They follow biological rules. And they don't happen because you bought a course or read a book or listened to a podcast. They happen because you change in actual practice what you're doing with your body over months, sometimes over years. There are days when you will feel like you're doing everything right and nothing is changing. And there are weeks where the body will quietly be rearranging itself in ways you cannot see yet. And then one day, you will notice that something is different, and you will not even be able to point to the moment it changed. So if anyone, including me, ever tells you that epigenetics is a shortcut to perfect health, walk away. It's not a shortcut. It's a framework. And the framework helps you understand why your body is doing what it is doing and what you might be able to do about it. The work itself is yours. Nobody can do the sleeping for you, or the eating, or the nervous system regulation. I can teach you the principles, and I can help you see what your body is asking for. But the actual living of it, that part, is in your hands, and it always will be. And one last thing in this section, because I think it's important. Epigenetics doesn't replace medicine. It works alongside it. If you have a serious diagnosis, you still need your doctor. If you need medication, you still take it. I'm not an anti-medication or anti-doctor. What I am is anti the idea that diagnosis plus medication is the end of the conversation. Because for most chronic conditions, it is not the end. It's the start. The medication holds the line. The lifestyle, food, stress, sleep, environment, those are what move the line. And both are real and useful. The mistake is using only one of them when you have access to both. Let me give you very briefly a tour of how this actually works in the body. I will not go deep. I won't test you on it. I just want you to have a picture in your head of what's happening so that when we talk about specific things in later episodes, we have a foundation. There are 3 main ways the epigenome controls which genes are active. 3 main mechanisms. I will name them, and then I'll give you a picture for each one, and then we'll move on. You don't have to remember the names. You only have to remember the pictures. The first mechanism is called methylation. We'll spend an entire episode on this one in a few weeks because it is the most important and the one with the most everyday relevance. For now, the picture is this. Methylation is when the body sticks a tiny chemical marker, like a post-it, called a methyl group, onto a specific spot on a gene. When the marker is there, the gene gets quieter. When the marker is removed, the gene gets louder. So methylation is like a tiny finger that turns the volume down on a particular gene. Your body is doing this constantly on thousands of genes every minute of every day. And here's what I want you to really sit with about methylation. The materials your body uses to make these tiny markers come straight out of your food. Not metaphorically, literally. Certain B vitamins, particularly folate and B12, plus a few other nutrients, are the raw material. If you are low in these, your body cannot make the markers efficiently. The piano player tries to turn down the volume on a gene that should be quiet, and the player's hands are weak. The gene stays louder than it should, and over years, this is not a small thing. This is, for example, one of the reasons why a woman in her 40s with low folate, who has been told her blood work is fine because her hemoglobin is in range, can be quietly struggling with hormone imbalance, with mood, fatigue, cognitive fog. The standard tests do not look at the methylation machinery. The methylation machinery is the part nobody is checking. We will go deep on this when we get there. The second mechanism is called histone modification. And this also sounds technical, but the picture is simple. Your DNA inside each of your cells is not floating around loose. It's packed up. It's wrapped around little protein spools, almost like thread on a bobbin. The spools are called histones. Now, depending on how tightly the DNA is wrapped around these spools, the genes are either accessible or hidden. If the DNA is wrapped very tightly, the gene is locked away. The piano player cannot reach the key. If the DNA is loose, the gene is open for business. Imagine a library. Some books are out on the shelves, easy to grab, easy to read. Some books are in storage in the basement behind locked doors. The books are still the same books. They have the same words inside them, but whether you can actually read them today depends on whether they are accessible. Histone modification is how your body decides which books are out on the shelves and which are in the basement. Exercise, for example, has been shown to physically change the way certain genes are packed in your muscle cells, making genes for energy production more accessible. Chronic stress has been shown to do the opposite for repair genes. Your library is being rearranged based on what you are asking it for. And the third mechanism involves small molecules called non-coding RNAs. And also, this name is a mouthful. The picture is again simple. Think of them as messengers running around inside the cell, intercepting other messages, blocking them, redirecting them, or amplifying them. They are like the editorial team in a newsroom. The news come in from the genes. The editors decide which stories get published, which stories get killed, and which ones get rewritten before they go out. Your daily life influences which editors are on shift. Now, you do not need to remember the names. If I asked you next week, I wouldn't expect you to recall them. What I want you to remember are the three pictures: the tiny finger that turns down the volume, a library that decides which books are accessible, and the editors that decide which stories get out. 3 different ways the player can shape what the piano actually plays. And all 3 of these mechanisms respond to what is actually happening in your body. Not to what you intended, not to what you bought, to what is in the bloodstream, what is in the gut, in the lungs, in the cells. That is what the player listens to. I want to take a moment and tell you why I think this conversation is more urgent now than it has ever been. We are living, all of us, in an environment that our bodies were not designed for. I don't mean that in a romantic, back to nature way. I mean it in a measurable, biological way. The food supply has changed dramatically in the last 50 years. The soils are depleted. The water carries contaminants. Air, especially indoor air, is full of compounds that didn't exist 100 years ago. The light environment has shifted. Sleep environment. Social environment. The amount of constant low-grade stress most of us live with would have been unthinkable to a person living in 1920. And our bodies are responding to all of that. The pianos are still the same. The DNA most of us carry is essentially the same DNA that humans have carried for tens of thousands of years. But the players in many of our bodies are being asked to play music that the piano was not designed for. The pianos are warping. The keys are sticking. The music is coming out distorted. This is, I think, the reason we are seeing the patterns we are seeing now. Autoimmune diseases on the rise in age groups where they were rare a generation ago. Fertility problems in couples who, on paper, shouldn't have them. Burnout at 35. Cognitive decline at 60. Chronic conditions stacking on top of each other in people who don't feel old enough to have them. The medical system, faced with this, has done what it knows how to do. It has named the diseases, written prescriptions, and offered management. That's not bad. Management saves lives. There are situations where medication is exactly the right tool, but management is not the same as understanding. Management is what you do after the music has already gone wrong. Understanding is what lets you change the music before the wrongness becomes a diagnosis. Epigenetics is the framework for understanding. It lets you look at what is going wrong in a body and ask, what is this body being asked to play right now? And is there a way to change the score? That question is, in my experience, available to almost everyone. Not in every case, not always to the same degree, but in a much larger percentage of cases than the medical system currently recognizes. And the people who get to ask that question first, who get to apply it to their own bodies and to the bodies of the people they love, get an enormous advantage. This is what I want to give you over these 11 weeks. The framework, the questions, understand it. So that you can stand in your own life with a different kind of literacy than the one you have been given. So that is where I want to leave you for this first episode of season 2. With the two sisters, with a piano, with a strange and humbling truth that we mapped the entire human genome and found we had been looking in wrong places. With the idea that the music your body is playing right now is not fixed. Look at your life this week. Just one thing. One meal you eat, one night of sleep, one conversation you have, or one decision about how to spend an hour. And ask yourself very quietly, what am I asking my body to play right now? Not in a self-critical way. Not in a way that turns you against yourself. In a curious way. Just notice. Because that noticing is where this whole thing begins. Next Tuesday, we go deeper. We look at the question of how much your genes actually decide and why a family history of something isn't the same as prophecy. If you've ever been told by a doctor or by a relative that something runs in your family and there's nothing you can do about it, next week is for you. Thank you for being here with me at the start of this season. If this episode opened something up for you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with somebody who needs the framework. Somebody who has been told their body is just unlucky, or just genetic, or just old. There's a different way to look at it, and the people in your life deserve to hear it. I'll see you next Tuesday, because health is a choice.